Good morning. It's nice to see everyone. Thank you all for coming out. Thanks to GovExec. This is, as Tim talked about earlier, this is our fifth GovExec live event that we've done, and I've been really impressed with the conversation and the folks who have come in from government and talking about all the great work that they're doing. So we appreciate you all engaging on this event series and also this topic of HR modernization. So Carlos, we had a whole spiel all set to go, and most of our stuff that we talked about were talked about on the first panel. So thanks everybody for coming. We're gonna pivot a little bit, but I want to start. I want to start by talking about, if you could just share a minute or two about your experience and talk about HR modernization generally. We heard a lot about the IT side of it and the system side of it, but it's actually a really huge holistic issue when we're talking about HR modernization. Can you just give us some kind of opening thoughts on that?
Right, it runs the gamut. I mean, I've been doing shared services for a long time, and the need to really consolidate and get to more enterprise and get down to fewer systems is a business imperative. And we talked a lot about in the first panel about automation, standardization, et cetera. And the only way that's going to happen is through consolidation and more shared services, which will reduce the cost and frankly allow people to focus more on mission. So I think there's a lot of benefits there. Robotics was talked about, a big topic area. What we have to manage is the proliferation of bots, right? Just as we've tried to manage the proliferation of systems, the proliferation of bots has to be managed. I mean, you guys are human resource professionals. We have to talk about the non-human resources and how are those going to be managed in the future.
So, some of you might have seen the governor of California last week announced that he is setting up a commission on the future of the workforce. Be focused in California, but obviously pretty much anything you do in California, you do across the rest of the country. A lot of the language he used in setting that up and in the announcement was, we're going to get out in front of this, we're going to manage this process. But I also think that comes from, there's a lot of fear, right? I'm no longer going to have a job because, as Lindsay was talking about earlier, well, I have to process that, I have to do that data entry for that form for the name change for the federal employee. What can we do to kind of manage that fear? I feel like that's really a change management issue with the federal workforce rather than making sure that the IT systems work. Talk about that for a little bit.
I think what the governor in California is doing with the commission is talking about it. And I think that's the first step is we have to talk about it because it is going to fundamentally change people, what they do, how they do it, and they're going to need to be reskilled. And I think there's a lot of people who are scared. I mean, one of the biggest impediments to systems modernizations we have today is that fear of change, that people don't want to go through that modernization of the system. So I think just having that discussion and really looking at the kind of jobs that are going to fundamentally change. Frankly, they're looking at taxi drivers, bus drivers, right, with autonomous vehicles. Those are careers that we're not going to have in the future. I was joking that, and it frankly really isn't a joke, but accountants are on the list of...
We do a lot of accounting, in case you don't know.
Are on the list of professionals that are ripe for disintermediation. And so we have to be talking about this across a broad spectrum of careers.
Yeah, I get a lot of, probably shouldn't share this, but I get a lot of cold calls from marketers who want to automate our marketing process, by the way, so it can't really be done.
I'm sure.
I think I'm fine for a year at least. So one of the things that's pretty interesting too is, and we've talked about this before, Carlos, so let's say an agency, we've heard of a lot of stories around the federal government about folks moving to automation, about setting up bots to run more data entry processes. I know GSA has done a great pilot with looking up companies' DUNS numbers and their kind of credentials for contracting. So let's do a little scenario. So we heard that earlier reference, there's a government shutdown, right? So what happens when you have a fully automated, do the bots keep going? Do they get a notice that they're either exempt or
right.
or accepted?
It is an interesting question that we need to think about. Do you have to turn off your bots during a government shutdown? One of the stories I read, and probably in GovExec, was around some of the challenges that the government had still getting payroll out to a lot of employees at the end of the shutdown. because they had some things that needed to get into there. There were changes, or maybe they were temp employees, or some sort of things. But there was a number of employees who still couldn't get paid in those initial payroll cycles and who were left without. Those things could have been easily automated. A bot could have taken in those emails and made the changes, and everything could have been done when people got back. But the question becomes, is that allowable, right? You know,
legally or otherwise, yeah.
Right? Legally or otherwise, and I think these are going to be fundamental questions that we have to answer.
So I did, and on that particular issue too, I know that was basically put the pressure on a lot of federal employees to get that work done, most of which I think was done in 3 to 4 days, based on at least the anecdotal things that I heard from my folks in government. I was at GSA in 2013 for the 3-week full shutdown, and I didn't have any. I know there's a small group of feds, I think about 20 or 25,000, who had a very hard time getting paid after this shutdown. But I think the bigger point though is that we have the technology and we're starting to use it, but are we really moving into a system where we're thinking holistically about what the implications for that are?
The policy implications, right? So we talk about it in terms of Uber vehicles and autonomous vehicles, but we need to be thinking policy across a broad spectrum of things.
So, and Lindsay referenced that on the first panel too. She talked about when they moved to a more automated process and a workflow, they didn't just digitize the old paper-based system, right? They rethought the entire way that the process works. And I worked for Tony Scott, the former federal CIO. He oversaw an internal process at OMB that he was very frustrated with, and they basically just digitized the paper process and had the same exact problem. Everything was electronic, but the same workflow obstacles and stumbles really tripped up the process, and it was essentially a complete waste of time, which he loves telling that story, by the way.
Yeah, you know, the other thing that struck me in the last panel was Jerry's comments about how they're rotating people through various HR functions, and you know that's going to be an imperative. But I think the government has to think even broader than that. You know, what I see in our workforce, in our millennial workforce, they're not going to stay for very long if they're not challenged with new things. I'll say every 18 months. And so we have to be able to give that workforce the ability to go to FAA and work on a program there and standing up a program there, and then when they're done with that, to go over to the Department of Energy and do a new program. And these are things that are nearly impossible to do in a turnkey manner in the government. And you know, in a firm, even a large firm like Grant Thornton, I can do those things fairly easily. I got people who second to the UK, they come back, they transfer over, maybe do some commercial, do some internal things, and there are processes that just take, you know, hours to do, right, to approve and to get that change done. But without that, my ability to retain employees would be drastically impacted. And I think that's the other thing is, you know, we do have this retirement wave, we have the millennials, but how are we going to retain them and keep them challenged?
So, and that's a good point. Oh, you all should, if you want to ask questions, you're welcome to ask questions too. So feel free to interject at any time, and we'll get a mic to you. So, one of the stats I like to share, my dad was a public school teacher. He taught 39 years in the same room at a high school, teaching high school music. I reached out to him one day after my first job, after I got laid off, and I said, I need your help to write a resume. He's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So millennials, on average, will change jobs 4 times in the first 10 years out of college. I'm not a millennial. I know I look young enough to be one, but I'm not. And I had 6 jobs in the first 10 years. So talk a little bit more about that recruiting and retention, what the younger workforce is looking for. You know, we heard earlier the number of millennials in government is kind of drastically low considering how many of them there are. What are some things that government can be doing, things that we've tried to do that have either shown success or would make it easier for millennials to think, yes, government is a job that I want to move into?
One is mission. I think the generation is much more mission oriented, and you know, corporate social responsibility is very important to them. So as a organization, we have to have part of our mission to be corporately social responsible, or else they're not going to come work for us. And I think government has that in spades and needs to leverage that.
Yeah. Most of the employee viewpoint survey results every year show about 90+% of folks are in government because it's about the mission, which is drastically higher than commercial, the same stat on commercial companies.
And I think that's the selling point. The other thing is you can't leave recruiting to recruiters. you have to have your executives, the people, they have to be out there. They have to touch the individuals. They have to be doing the recruiting. It's that personal touch that makes a big difference. And so if the executives in your organizations are thinking that you're just going to find people for them, that's really not going to work. They have to be out on campus. They have to be out at invitationals or at women in technology events and other events to do that recruiting.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. We heard earlier too that we talked about what's the first budget to get cut in government, usually training, et cetera. But are there even, most agencies don't even have recruiting budgets, right? There are certain ones. IRS, I think, is probably a good example. A lot of the Department of Homeland Security agencies, the FBI, obviously, they have the DoD services have a large recruiting presence. But a lot of the other agencies just don't have room for that. Are there creative ways that they can be going about finding the right folks for these jobs?
Not without money. Right. I mean, you can be as creative. I mean, obviously there's social media and many other ways to attract folks, but until the hiring processes are streamlined and it doesn't take 6 months, right, and or resumes go into a dark hole, it's going to be very difficult. I'd say the other budget area that's really constraining is training. Right, we all know training budgets have been cut drastically, and it's not something that we've seen being as important. But again, with automation and disintermediation of jobs is going to be extremely important. And with the unemployment rate, particularly in this geography, as low as it is, you have to be able to retool, retrain people. That was discussed, but that also takes resources to do. We're finding the same thing. We have to take folks and teach them how to be cyber professionals. We don't hire enough accountants. There's not enough accountants graduating, so we have to teach them accounting. These are the things that we have to do, but it also takes time and resources to do.
Yeah, my first day at GSA was the Monday after the conference scandal went public. So that was a fun week, if anyone else was at GSA at the time. Let's switch a little bit. We haven't gotten into some of the kind of government-wide things that are going on. The OMB has put out, and GSA is heavily involved in this on the HR side, their new Quality Service Management Organization strategy. GSA is the QSMO, a name that I fought violently to be used because no one knows what it means. It's a classic government acronym. What are we going to see coming? I think we've heard a lot of the stuff in the first panel about things that the QSMO is supposed to try to do government-wide. And I've asked this question to other people. You mentioned it at the beginning. We've been doing shared services since forever. Is this time going to be any different? Are there things that in this approach or in this current administration that you think will push us over the edge that will help to actually get some efficiencies across all of government? Or
I think I'd say it's very bipartisan. I mean, it's of all good government. I think the president's management agenda is excellent. It does take a step forward, but I am of the opinion that you need the stick, and it can't just be carrots. And I think we're still in a world where we're looking for people to voluntarily go to shared services, and that's just not going to work in this environment. We don't have the budget resources to continue to operate and maintain the systems that we have into the future. And if we don't start putting a stick to it and mandating the consolidation, it's not going to happen. And so at some point, then that means that Congress is going to have to get involved and mandate it. I've advocated, gosh, it must be 7-8 years ago now, for BRAC-like commissions to make those determinations, right? Because this is the issue. The agency doesn't want to make the decision, OMB, nobody's making the decision unless some leader will voluntarily go. I think we need some sort of objective bodies that will make decisions based on data.
I think the funding is an important part of that too, right? Yeah. There's an example from Canada from about 10 years ago. They completely changed the way they do their entire management process at their agencies. But they sucked back all the money. So agencies had no dollars. They created a centralized system, and everyone was super happy about it. I'm not sure that's going to happen. I mean, that's not the way that our
Well,
government
that's
is set
budget,
up,
that's
right?
budget reform, right?
True, that's true, yeah.
You know, we'll probably see civil service reform before we see budget reform, but that's another. Yeah.
So we're about out of time, but just want to say thank you again for coming this morning. We hope this has been a helpful short view into kind of our view of the way HR modernization is going. And we'll be here after if any of you want to chat more. And thanks again for coming.